Hello. I'm waiting for a new phone right now because mine's kind of messed up. But I usually show my face. I prefer showing my face because sometimes I look stupid. Um, anyway, I did more in depth discussions. Not super in depth, but my initial thoughts on this book before. I have a playlist on Malazan that you can go check out. But today I want to give a spoiler free um, view of this book for anybody who may be interested. So, Malazan Book of the Fallen is a 10-book series of high epic fantasy, um, like most others can't compare to, outside of, maybe Tolkien and Brandon Sanderson and Wheel of Time. I can't think of too many others that are, I can't think of any that are this big in scope. But this is Book 1, Gardens of the Moon. And even I did this when I first started reading. And you'll hear this a lot if you look around with Malazan. You will hear that this is the most difficult to understand universe in all of existence, that you'll be confused and taking copious amount of notes 24/7. No. It's really not. I think you hear one side of the aisle that says this is too hard and too obtuse and you're just going to have the hardest time of your life, and it scares people away. And I think that's unfortunate. I also think, to an extent, there is a sort of elitist mentality toward this series, which is that, well, maybe you just don't understand high art. So if you don't like it, you just don't get it. And it's not for you. But I don't think it's too intellectual for a person. I feel anybody that's taken a significant amount of time studying theology or history or philosophy, they wouldn't be too bewildered by a lot of this, right? This isn't the Bible 2.0, where we're just gaining the most insane insights into humankind. I think Steven Erikson represents a lot of these things and themes within the stories that I've read so far in an expert way, but I don't think by any means the human condition has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. There's nothing being said in this book that has not been said elsewhere. It's just said very well here. But the backstory to all of this, I should say, is that Steven Erikson and his friend Ian Esselmont, I could be getting all of the name wrong, but they love to play D&D. I mean, who doesn't? It used to be a thing for nerds, but because of Stranger Things, people are realizing that it's for everybody. But nerd was just a derogative term back in the day, so what does it even matter anymore? I mean, comic books and superheroes were nerdy, and now the MCU is one of the biggest money makers on the entire planet, so, everything that may seem stupid to other people back in the day is now the norm. Even fantasy itself is much more accepted than it used to be. But that is the way of the world. But they were playing D&D, and they started creating their own setting and their own lore and their own rules. Like, this is really good. So maybe we should actually make something out of this. So I think originally Erikson tried to write this off as a movie. So I don't know in what world this would work as a movie. Maybe as a TV show. But that didn't fall through. So he wrote a book instead. So we have Gardens of the Moon. First book of a 10-book series. There's also 6 not spin-off, because this is a co-created franchise, but a lot of people consider it more of a spin-off, but 6 books that are kind of intertwined with the 10 books. And then you have 3 prequel books written by Esselmont. You have I believe a trilogy that is meant to come out. So far there's only 2 books that are like in the ancient past that Erikson is writing. And then you have 1 sequel novel out of a trilogy, I believe, that is being written by Erikson at this point in time that I'm talking about this book, which is September 28th, 2024. I don't know when this video will be uploaded because I have a lot of videos pre-recorded. But there's that. So I have, at this point of recording, I'm up to Dead House Gates. I finished it, and I'll be starting Memories of Ice. But as for this book, Is it confusing? Yes. It drops you into this world, and it doesn't explain anything. Not really. By the time you finish this book, there's going to be stuff you still aren't fully understanding. Warrens, the magic system in general, most of the stuff you're not going to get on the first read. It's not going to make sense. Like the cards, like the cards, the tarot card thing, forget it. You're not understanding the deck of dragons in this book. It's not happening. Unless you spoil yourself. There's no way in hell you'd understand it in this first book. It's not intended to be understood. However, after Darushtistan, and you've met all the key characters and all the key players for this particular novel, I'd say it's pretty much, at least for what the main story is and for the characters and all that, at least for what you absolutely need to understand, you will by like 100-something pages in. I don't think it's truly that difficult to understand. It's confusing. There's going to be a lot of things said that you just have to go into the mindset that, like, I'm not going to get it, but eventually I will. If not in this book, in a future book. Now, that's commitment, you know? And I get when people say, like, you just got to read all 10 books, it's all going to come together, you're going to be like, oh my god, this is amazing. But at the same time, I do understand for people, they got to spend their hard-earned money. You know, they work day in, day out, and they got to spend their money to buy this book and buy the rest of the series to fully comprehend it. I can see how that would turn off some people. But I do think this is genuinely really well written, and I think if you give it the time of day, if you push through this one, if you go into Deadhouse Gates and Memories of Ice, I think what people tend to say is, by Memory of Ice, if you're still not feeling it, if you're still not getting it as to why people like it, then yeah, it's probably not for you and you can drop it off. That doesn't make you stupid. That doesn't make you lesser. That doesn't make you an idiot, okay? People have different preferences, okay? I will never call you stupid for not liking this series. I'll not say that you are intellectually inferior for not liking this series, okay? This isn't a pissing contest. If you, let's say you hate fish. I love fish. Maybe you are a steak person. You really love steak. Or maybe you're vegan. You don't eat meat at all. Really doesn't matter. Okay, but let's just go with the analogy that you like steak but don't like fish. Okay? I could prepare the most delicious, the most savory, with all the right spices, all the right ingredients, cooked to absolute perfection, the best salmon you've ever had in your entire life. The very creme de la crop, the very best salmon in the whole wide world, better than anywhere that you've ever had it. It is the best fish in existence. But you don't like fish. It doesn't make you wrong. It's just not for you. Right? So I think two things can be true at the same time. Don't think it makes you stupid. Just might not be for you. But I would recommend, even though I've not finished Memories of Ice, I would say that you should, if it seems at least somewhat intriguing to you, if the idea of a massive world, because the thing about Malazan too is it's not just this one continent that this particular story takes place on, which is in Genebacus. The next book takes place in an entirely different continent in 7 cities. Imagine like China, Europe, the United States, 3 different places that are fully fleshed out. But there's more than 3 places. But there's like many places fully fleshed out in a gigantic world. So it's a lot. It's a lot to try to invest in and to try to get into. But if you do get into it, you're going to really, 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 really get into it. There's not really a two-way streak. You either love it or it's not for you. I don't really hear too many people saying that this series is just okay. So I'm trying to see what I can tell you without spoilers, what this story is even about. There are these bridge burners that in of itself doesn't really make sense to you without context. But let's just say they're soldiers and they're being tasked by this giant empire to go do something. Meanwhile, in this city, which those characters are heading toward, we meet a whole nother cast of characters, some assassins, some not. And they have a whole political intrigue and conflicts going on within this particular city. And they all join up, it all comes to an head, and ends with a sort of ancient threat that is kind of taken care of fairly quickly, I guess I'll say. I guess that's spoilers, but this series is so much more than just that one plot point. But without spoilers, that's pretty much all I can tell you. If you want some more in-depth thoughts, I did my initial thoughts live streams, and I'm sure I'll probably have discussions with other people, like my friend Brennan, Quinlan Voss on YouTube, when he finishes it. And my dog is barking because he's annoying. Oh my goodness, hold on a second. Because he likes to be a little poopy butthole. But overall, it is confusing. It is weird. And there's going to be many concepts and situations and things that just you're not going to grasp on a first read. I didn't. I'm fully prepared to admit that, and that's okay. But I think the characters really drew me in. It's not very character focused. I think another thing to keep in mind with this series is typical fantasy is Breaking Bad. Like really, really solid stories, right? And really bombastic things happen, and a lot of big bombastic things happen in this series. Don't get me wrong. Like so much so that like I don't know the rules of this universe, so I don't know what's acceptable and what's not in terms of grand things happening. But in Breaking Bad, it's very guy with cancer becomes a drug dealer, and very bad things ensue from that. It progressively becomes a dark comedy into just a complete and utter drama. But that's very like fast paced and in your face kind of. I would say like The Lord of the Rings or The Wheel of Time, even though I haven't read it yet. Brandon Sanderson, these are all like Breaking Bads. Whereas Malazan is more of a Better Call Saul. Better Call Saul certainly has those aspects, those action-packed and suspenseful moments. But the journey is more of a subtle approach. So, for example, like with the character stuff. Now, Erickson, I think in some interviews, is labeled it as melodrama when it's focused on. I don't think that's necessarily. I think that's just called drama. But whatever. Melodrama makes me think of like a soap opera specifically, which I don't think too many things do. I don't think too many stories do that hard with it. But what Erickson does is he may not garner. He does sometimes, like in Dead House Gates, he certainly was a bit more on that side, I'd say, than this book. But you will have little moments. Instead of big crescendo moments of character and bursting out, you have these little small moments between characters. For instance, there's a moment between this guy named Ganos Perrin, one of the main characters, Perrin, and this guy named Cole, I believe is his name. And they're sitting around a campfire, and they're just talking. And it's written really well. But it's a really, really small scene in the grand scheme of things, but it stands out. So I think if I had to compare it to anything, I'd say Malazan is more of the Better Call Saul of fantasy. And if you don't know what Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul is, and this analogy did not work for you. But that's what I would say for this series it's kind of going for. But I think it's really worth your time if you try to invest in it. But definitely try up to a trilogy of it. Try up to book 3. And if you're still not feeling it, it's not for you. And I apologize. But I think if you're just going to go with the flow of this first book, I think you're going to have a lot of fun. I think you generally will if you just give it a chance. There's so many amazing characters from Amander Rake, Ganos Perrin, Shadow Throne, Croupy, Croup. I don't fudgy know his name, but I love him. So Calum, Quick Ben, all these characters that you fall in love with, Whiskey Jack, and maybe you don't fall in love with them with the first read. I don't know. I think your mileage may vary, but there's something to this world which I simply have not gotten in many other titles, and so it keeps me coming back for more, keeps me engaged, keeps me wanting to see what the future may offer. So maybe this series isn't for you, maybe it is, but you do yourself a disservice if you don't at least find out for yourself. So I hope I've given you kind of a realistic expectation. This is not the hardest thing to get into. You don't need to take copious amount of notes, though I would say in general, if school has taught me anything, I think it is good just in general if you're reading for fun. Maybe even do this while you're playing a video game that requires reading, like, Morrowind or Skyrim or, games like that. I think it is always good to simply take notes while reading something because it helps you retain that information better, and it makes you, reading much as watching a film is very passive. Just sit there and watch, which I think is why video games tend to be a perfect medium because you get to watch, you get to interact, right? So you can find a medium between that, between films and books as compared to video games, if you simply write it down. Now you are making yourself more of an active participant. Think so, like maybe you're a historian and you're writing down, your perspective as you go through the books, And I think that will help you just in general, whether or not be for Malazan or not. Do it for any story you read. I think it can help you a lot to retain and appreciate stories a bit more. But like I said, this is not some super intellectual story, okay? I am not the smartest tool in the shed. I'll be completely honest. I've never gone to college. I want to act, and I don't know how to do that, and I only took an intro drama class, so I have no idea what I'm doing. But I'll tell you what, I know I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, and I still understood these stories for what I needed to understand for each particular story. Whatever I fully just did not understand, it's because Erickson did not leave out all the details for me to understand yet. But I trust that he will have me have everything understood by the end. Now I know, again, it's a mighty investment. 1,000 pages, this series starts becoming the norm. But get up to book 3. And if you feel it, then you're just not a fish person. And that's okay. But anyway, guys, I was absolutely floored by this introduction to the universe. I have yet to see anything that has transported me so quickly into another world. And I think part of that really is just because it throws you in. I said the Dark Souls of novels earlier because Dark Souls, much like this series, doesn't really explain anything to you when you begin the game. You are kind of just thrown into a world and you are meant to pick up the pieces and figure out what is actually happening. Because otherwise you're just killing a bunch of things with no explanation. But I think that's part of the charm of this series is as you go through it, you'll start to pick up on things and notice things and make these connections, which will retroactively make things better. Of course, I'm trying to read these things. That's why I do my initial thoughts, because I want my initial thoughts to be as accurate to how it is to actually read these things for a first time, as opposed to rereading it and then talking about it when you have the benefit of hindsight to be like, well, this is all just perfectly planned out and amazing and wonderful. Because it's just, back in the, 90s when this came out, it was a long way away from the crippled god. So how can you possibly say that, you understood everything before it was actually completed? This is why hindsight is a bit dangerous sometimes when you're trying to critique something fairly. Do I think this book is perfect? Absolutely not. Do I think Erickson's prose are absolutely wonderful and his writing in general just tends to be really good? Yes, but nothing's perfect. I'll say near the end, for me personally, and I get it in a reread, I probably won't care because I'll have everything explained. But they mention stuff like the Azoth at the very end of the book. There's feels like a Deus Ex Machina. Now that I've read the second book, I'm like, well, of course. But back then, sure, that was Erickson's intent, so how could it be a mistake? I'm not saying it's a mistake, I just don't know if there is, for instance, George Lucas. The Star Wars prequels are exactly what he wanted them to be. Does that mean that they are perfect films? No, sure, the artist had complete integrity to write as he saw fit and to have everything portrayed as he saw fit. And all the power to him. But that doesn't mean that film is 100% perfect. Right? Many people, I mean, I love the prequels, but many people complain about them, And are they necessarily wrong? No, not. Some points they definitely are, and they're just hateful little poopy buttholes, but some points are valid, So I think the same thing with this book series. There are some things that are just, sure, this may be exactly your intent, but is that best for a reading experience? Especially for a first time. I don't know. I think that's debatable. But and then like these these people called like the Crimson Guard show up at like the very end. Again, it feels very Deus Ex Machina. Now, of course, if I read the whole series, then oh well, of course they were there. It makes complete and utter sense. Sure, but on a first read, no, they just pop out of thin air, and it's really annoying. But those are literally like those are my smallest ever complaints about this book. I think it's a complete net positive and completely and utterly worth your time. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. I'll have more reviews of Malazan as we go through. If you want to see a little bit more spoiler, in-depth initial thoughts, I have a playlist where you can watch those. And anyway, yeah. I'll see you guys later. Thanks so much for watching.